Papal conclaves have become genuinely popular material for movies and television over the past couple of decades. Tense, secretive, high stakes, and set in one of the most visually striking rooms on Earth. It's easy to see why writers love it. But after 5 videos in this series covering how conclaves actually work, we're in a good position to separate what these depictions get right from what they exaggerate, invent, or flatten into simpler drama than reality actually offers. Some of the real details, it turns out, are stranger and more interesting than the fictional versions. Let's go through the biggest myths one at a time. Welcome to Papal. This is part 7 in our Conclave series. If this is your first video with us, the earlier ones in this series cover the full process in detail. This one works best as a companion to those, so we won't be re-explaining every basic mechanic here. Popular depictions almost always show cardinals actively campaigning, forming voting blocks, making deals, promising future favors, essentially running a compressed political campaign behind closed doors. It makes for compelling drama, but it significantly overstates how open this behavior actually is in reality. Formal campaigning for the papacy is considered deeply inappropriate within church culture, and cardinals who are seen as too openly ambitious for the role are generally viewed less favorably by their peers specifically because of that ambition. The general congregations we've covered in earlier videos do involve real conversation and real assessment of who might be ready to lead, and cardinals absolutely do form opinions and informal alignments based on theology, region, and priorities. But it's a much quieter, more indirect process than open campaigning, closer to careful, respectful conversation among colleagues than anything resembling a political primary. That said, it would be inaccurate to swing too far the other direction and claim there's zero politics involved at all. Cardinals are human beings with real theological and practical disagreements, and those disagreements do shape how conversations unfold. The myth isn't that politics exists, it's that it looks anything like a modern political campaign, with public positioning and visible deal-making. It doesn't. Dramatic depictions usually show the smoke appearing crisp and immediately obvious, clearly black, then later clearly white, with the crowd in St. Peter's Square reacting instantly and correctly every single time. The real history here is messier. Before a chemical additive system was standardized in the early 2000s specifically to fix this problem, smoke color could genuinely be ambiguous in real conclaves, appearing grayish or changing color as it dispersed, leading to real confusion among the waiting crowd outside. There are documented instances from 20th century conclaves where observers in the square initially couldn't agree on what color they were actually seeing, sparking premature excitement or premature disappointment before the bells confirmed things one way or the other. That's actually why the bells of St. Peter's ringing alongside the white smoke became an important secondary confirmation system. Precisely because smoke color alone had proven unreliable enough times in the past that the church added a backup signal. Modern conclaves, using standardized chemical smoke cartridges, have made this issue far less common today than it once was. But the clean, unambiguous smoke moment audiences see in movies is a modern reality more than a historical constant. Fictional depictions tend to swing to one of two extremes, either grim, almost prison-like deprivation, or opulent secretive luxury completely disconnected from the outside world. Neither extreme really matches the modern reality. Since the late 1990s, cardinal electors have stayed at the Domus Sancti Marthi, a Vatican guesthouse built specifically for this purpose. It's comfortable but genuinely modest, simple private rooms, functional rather than lavish, closer to a modest hotel or a retreat center than either a prison cell or a palace suite. This was actually a meaningful improvement from earlier centuries, when cardinals sometimes slept on cots crammed into makeshift partitions within the Sistine Chapel itself and nearby rooms, an arrangement Pope John Paul II specifically moved to change by having the Domus Sancti Marthi constructed. The food, similarly, is simple but adequate, nothing like the shrinking rations punishment system from medieval conclaves we discussed in an earlier video, but also nothing resembling a lavish, cinematic secret feast. It's ordinary, unremarkable meals, prepared by staff who are themselves bound by the same secrecy oath covering everyone else involved in the process. This is probably the single biggest exaggeration in fictional depictions, and it's an understandable one, since pure procedural accuracy rarely makes for gripping drama on its own. Movies and prestige television frequently introduce blackmail plots, hidden scandals used as leverage, and occasionally even outright violence or death within the conclave itself. There is real history of scandal, corruption, and even outright violence surrounding the papacy, particularly in certain especially turbulent medieval and Renaissance periods we've touched on elsewhere in this series, including some genuinely dark chapters involving poisoning allegations and political murder tied to particular Renaissance-era popes and their rivals. So it's not that this kind of thing has literally never happened anywhere near the papacy across 2,000 years of history. But within the modern conclave process specifically, meaning the actual sequestered voting period itself, under current security and procedural standards, there's no credible documented case in recent history of anything resembling the blackmail plots or physical violence commonly depicted in fiction. Modern conclaves, especially since the security reforms we covered in an earlier video, are process-heavy, quiet, and procedurally uneventful by design specifically to prevent exactly this kind of dramatic disruption. The tension in a real modern conclave is more the tension of careful deliberation and repeated voting rounds than the tension of a thriller plot. Fiction tends to compress or stretch conclave length for narrative convenience, sometimes resolving in a single dramatic vote for tight pacing, sometimes dragging on with escalating tension for many days to build suspense. Real modern conclaves, as we've covered, typically land somewhere in between, usually resolving within 2 to 4 days across multiple ballots, rarely in just one, and rarely stretching much beyond that under modern conditions. The 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis took 2 days and 5 ballots. The 1978 conclave that elected John Paul I took roughly 1 day and 4 ballots, one of the fastest in the modern era, while the second 1978 conclave that elected John Paul II took a few days longer, reflecting genuinely more contested deliberation among a divided group of cardinals. So there's no single typical number of ballots or days that fiction should be expected to match exactly, but audiences should know that both a single dramatic instant vote and a weeks-long escalating standoff are both, in different ways, exaggerations of how the modern process has actually tended to unfold. It's worth giving credit where it's due, because not everything in these depictions is inaccurate. Several recent, well-researched portrayals, including the widely discussed 2024 film simply titled Conclave, based on the novel by Robert Harris, clearly did real homework on procedural details. The physical ballot design, the folding process, the walk to the altar, the recited oath, the needle and thread method of linking ballots together during counting, and the 2/3 majority threshold have all been depicted with genuine accuracy in some of the more carefully researched recent productions. The overall atmosphere of solemn, ritualized formality, robes, Latin phrases, the physical setting of the Sistine Chapel itself, is also generally well captured, since that part of the experience really is as visually striking and deliberately ceremonial as it appears on screen. What fiction typically alters isn't usually the visible ritual. It's the invisible human drama layered on top of it, since that's the part audiences actually watch for, and pure procedural accuracy alone rarely sustains 2 hours of narrative tension on its own. Part of why these exaggerations spread so easily is simply that so few people have any real first-hand knowledge to compare fiction against. Conclaves are secretive almost by definition, and the actual sequestered participants are bound by an oath not to discuss specifics afterward, which we covered in detail in an earlier video. That secrecy, ironically, is exactly what leaves so much room for dramatized guesswork to fill the gap in the public imagination. It matters for a simple reason. Understanding what's genuinely accurate versus dramatized helps viewers engage with this fascinating, centuries-old process with real information rather than a purely fictionalized impression. Especially the next time an actual conclave happens and dominates global news coverage for a few intense days, with commentators and casual viewers alike drawing comparisons to whatever fictional depiction they watched most recently. So there's the real picture. Less campaigning and blackmail than fiction suggests, more careful procedural ritual than most dramatizations bother to show in full, and just enough genuine tension in the real process that it hasn't needed much embellishment to remain one of the most compelling political and spiritual events on Earth. If you enjoyed this myths versus reality breakdown, subscribe to Pope Pulse for the rest of this series, and let me know in the comments. Had you seen any conclave movies or shows before watching this series, and did anything here change how you saw them?